There we go. It's recording.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And so welcome again, everyone. My name is Marisa Lazoneco, and I have the privilege of working for the San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools under the area of LCAP, Local Control and Accountability Plan. But what we really do is make sure that we make connections to the families, to the community, and with educators. So we believe strongly that in order to support children, as a whole child, we need to bring all the key partners to the conversation, and that's the family, the educators, and the community partners. So it's an honor for me today to be able to be your host in a way, but not really a facilitator. I'm excited to introduce amazing keynote speakers. And before we get started, I want to thank all the partners that have really made this day possible. The Innovation and Engagement, Healthy SBCSS, also the Department of Behavioral Health, and also, of course, our presenter, Stan Collins from Each Mind Matters, and Cheryl Eskentin-Ryan, who will be also sharing today. So before he gets started, I want to say a little bit about Stan, who is going to be leading the information today. Stan has worked in the suicide prevention field for 2 decades since losing a friend to suicide in high school, utilizing his experience to support and develop strategies to create system-level change around suicide prevention. Stan is part of the California Department of Education Student Mental Health Policy Work Group that developed the model policy for youth suicide prevention in response to AB 2246. He is the co-founder of the Directing Change program and film contest. I've personally attended the film contest. I personally have cried through the wonderful and inspiring videos that youth have created to enter this conversation and influence other youth in the community as a prevention method. So thank you so much, Stan, for leading this work. Thank you for for serving our community and our youth and families. So without further ado, I'm turning it to you.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Stan Collins, one of the co-founders for Directing Change, and a good friend of mine, a colleague that I've known for a number of years, Cheryl Eskin, is going to be joining me as well. She's with Teen Line. We're going to talk more about what Teen Line is, but Cheryl's story is actually pretty amazing. She started back in the day working on the Teen Line herself. So Teen Line is actually a support line that is staffed by youth who go through a fairly rigorous training, and it provides a support hotline for youth where they can connect to somebody in their same age group. So you're going to be hearing about, I don't know, Cheryl, if you just want to say hi real quick.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here, and thanks for the intro.
And she's actually much more qualified to be here tonight because she is also a parent. So she will be speaking to that perspective as well. So with that, we're going to jump in. I want to start by sharing with you a film from the Directing Change program, and then we're going to share some slides. The first hour is going to be me and Cheryl kind of talking, lecturing a little bit, trying to get as much engagement from you as we can. And we've set aside the second hour, a full hour of conversation and dialogue and questions. So if you have questions as we go, please feel free to type them in the chat. If you want to wait to speak your question later, we'll have plenty of time for that as well. For now, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and pull up the
Esta es la historia de mi amigo Tyler. Durante nuestro primer año de la escuela secundaria, comenzó a alejarse de nuestro grupo de amigos. Después de esto, se volvió al alcohol y las drogas. Traté de mostrar mi preocupación, pero no se había dado cuenta de que solo estaba tratando de ayudar.
He estado pensando en esto por un tiempo ahora. No puedo seguir así viviendo de esto, a menos que algo en mi vida cambie. Así que al fin voy a hacerlo. Voy a buscar ayuda. Así que ha sido 2 meses desde que tenía pensamientos suicidas y estoy muy agradecido por Andrea, que ayudó a salvar mi vida.
All right, I'm gonna pull up the slides. Cheryl, just quick thumbs up if you can see it. All right, great.
Oh, wait, I don't see the slides yet. No.
Oh, okay. Now we're good?
Now I do.
Okay, great. And then just another note for anybody joining us. For now, though, if you could go ahead and just mute your microphone. If you have any background noise, we'd appreciate that. That would be helpful. But otherwise, we're going to jump right in. So you all know why we're here. We're here to have a conversation about suicide prevention, about mental health. And we're going to jump in. And I'm just realizing that when I shared that video with you, it wasn't full screen. I thought I was sharing with you full screen. So tech issues on that. I also want to acknowledge, you heard from the San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools. Also, San Bernardino County Behavioral Health has been part of the partnership that's brought us all here tonight. So they've been long supporters of the Directing Change program and the work that we do. You've met Cheryl and myself again. Both of us have decades of experience working in this topic. And what we're hoping to do tonight is not just leaving you with some knowledge, but really imparting to you that comfort to have conversations about mental health and suicide prevention with your youth. Directing Change is part of statewide efforts to prevent suicide, reduce stigma and discrimination around mental health, and also just improve the overall mental well-being of our youth. And we're funded by County Behavioral Health through CalMesa, the Mental Health Services Authority, under the umbrella of the Each Mind Matters campaign. I know San Bernardino's been huge at pushing out the lime green ribbon and all of our statewide work, but really Each Mind Matters is just a unifying voice to help amplify all the different voices across the state working to promote mental health and mental wellness. And we also have our Spanish language Sanamente campaign. Underneath Each Mind Matters, we also have the Know the Science campaign. The websites are suicideispreventable.org, and the Spanish language is El Suicidio es Prevenible. You can go there to learn more about warning signs, risk factors, how to have a conversation following our chat here tonight. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl to just kind of set the framework and the foundation for the day. So Cheryl, take it away.
Okay, perfect. That sounds good. So I just wanted to, as Stan said, I'm a parent myself. I have an 11 and 15-year-old who've been remote schooling for the past year at this point. My son actually goes back to school tomorrow. So it's super exciting on my end and also nerve-wracking, all those kinds of emotions. It sounds like some of you may be relating to as well. So I wanted to put in some caveats before we begin. Obviously, it's been a year. I'll just say that it's been an interesting year. We all have different experiences of what it's been like for us. But the fact that you're here today says something about the importance of this topic in your life, in your family, in just society at large. And I want to just acknowledge that if you have a teen who is struggling, or you are struggling, or anyone else is struggling, that doesn't mean you're a bad parent. It means you're a parent during extraordinary times. I mean, it's ridiculous what we've been going through. So want to kind of put that out there, just take any stigma away. Also caveating that parenting, and I'm saying this personally, is not intended to be 24/7. School has a bigger purpose than any of us ever realized, I think. So give yourself that credit. Take a moment to reflect that you've survived this year. And I put survived in quotes because I know it means very different things to different people. The people have loved ones they've lost, financial hardships, emotional difficulties. We all have such a wide range of what survived meant to us. I'm defining it as we're all here, we're at this point right now, and acknowledging what it might have taken to get here, especially when, at a certain point we didn't think it would be this long or we'd get here. I'm a big believer in breathing. It's gotten me through a lot of this pandemic. So if you can take a moment to breathe, and one of the techniques I like to do is just to breathe in for 4 seconds. So I can count that. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can hold it for 7 seconds. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then let it out on 8. And I'm realizing since I'm talking, it's making it go longer. But if you can let it out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So not going to say the end all be all, but hopefully it regulates our body system, gets us into a space where we can absorb, where we can have a moment of just feeling in a good place to have this presentation. I also want to caveat that Stan and I talk about suicide and talk about suicide prevention very often. So we talk about it. I don't want to say matter of fact, there's nothing matter of fact about it, but I want to acknowledge this is a really tough subject. People are coming here with your own experiences. Maybe you've lost people, maybe you've experienced being suicidal yourself. So to give yourself a moment of grace and to take care of yourself, presentations being recorded. If it's too much to listen to at that moment, take a break, listen to it later. If you need support, Stan and I are here as well. Involve the coping skills that you do need because it is a tough topic. So with that, I believe I turn it over to Stan again. Or is this me? This is me? Okay. Yeah. So we all as parents help so many people out between our kids, other people in our lives. Many of us are working many jobs or full-time jobs or multiple jobs, all that sort of stuff. It's hard to take time for ourselves, but how important it is to do so. And I'm one of those people who always says, I don't have any time for myself, but I'm going to venture to say we all probably have 5 minutes somewhere. So we put some exercises together. This isn't really for right now, but take a screenshot, hold on to this. If you have 5 minutes, something you can do for yourself. If you're lucky and have 15 minutes, some things you can do. And if you're really amazingly lucky and have 30 minutes, some other things you can do. So that's your homework from this assignment, to take either 5, 15, or 30 minutes to take care of yourself at some point. What I mean, and someone asked a question of parenting not meant to be 24/7. What I'm meaning, it was kind of a tongue-in-cheek, kind of trying to attempt at humor. Maybe it fell flat. I was more saying, usually, unless our, when our children are toddlers or infants, they're usually around us 24/7, or someone has to take responsibility for them. As they get older, usually they're out of our house, they're having more independent interaction. We've been in the pandemic, a lot of people where families have just been together all the time, and that's just not a natural order of things for us or our teens who are coveting independence. And now I'm turning it over to Stan.
All right, so to lay the foundation for the conversation tonight, as Cheryl mentioned, we work and talk and write a lot about suicide prevention, but this may be a new topic area for you. So I wanted to start by clarifying some of the wording and terminology that we use related to suicide. So let's start here, and I'm going to actually ask for you to engage in the chat with us for a little activity here in a second. But one of the things the suicide prevention community is attempting to do is clarify the way in which we refer to actions and behaviors related to suicide. And one of the most common terms that we hear when someone has died by suicide is that that person committed suicide, right? We hear that, that's what we kind of grew up with, that phrasing. But this is where I want you to type into the chat. What are some of the other actions that we commit? So fill in the blank here. We commit blank, we commit blank. So what are some of the other actions that we use that term commit? What we commit this, we commit, what are some of those other actions that we commit? Adultery, crime, we get committed to a mental institution, we commit felonies, sin, murder, robbery, we commit. And so all those things that you just put in there, just from the term committed, brought with it a very negative connotation. Now, the reality is, you're also amazing parents who committed some time to be here today, to be more prepared. We commit to our families, we commit to our friends, we commit to our relationships, to our jobs. And yet that term committed has a very negative connotation. It typically helps, people think of a place or crime or sin. A lot of people are shocked to find out it used to be illegal to attempt suicide. A lot of faith institutions are starting to change the way that they frame suicide, because they have framed suicide as a sin or the equivalent of a sin in the hopes that it would prevent people from doing it. But all they realized is that it prevented people from doing was seeking help. And so we're trying to get away from that term committed suicide. And instead, we would ask that people instead use the term died by suicide. And again, what that does is it takes that stigma, that bias, that shame away from those words. You will also hear people refer to a successful versus an unsuccessful attempt. If you break that down, a successful attempt means a person had died. An unsuccessful attempt means the person has lived. And so there's really no success or lack thereof when it comes to suicide. And it's either a death by suicide or an attempted suicide. We know the results of both of those situations without that bias, that stigma, that shame. And when we do this, when we help to clarify the terminology, it helps us just to have more coherent conversations and be more critical when we're diving into it. Now, we're not going to spend too much time here, but I did want to paint a picture for you of the overall issue of youth suicide. Every one of us who's here tonight would agree that any suicide of a youth is one too many. But the bigger issue is not the number of youth who are dying by suicide, but the number of youth who are being impacted by suicide. As you see on the screen from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, approximately 20% of youth reported they had considered suicide in the previous 12 months. 13% of youth had said they had made a plan about how they would make a suicide attempt. And 7% of youth reported that they had actually made a suicide attempt. So we're looking at 1 in 5 youth who think about suicide and 1 in 10 youth who actually make a suicide attempt. So yes, every single youth death is a tragedy, but the larger travesty is that there are this many youth who are in so much emotional pain that thoughts of suicide are entering into their lives. And so that's really at the heart of this conversation, is if we ever want to reduce suicide deaths, we need to start by first being aware of just how many youth are out there and are struggling. The good news, though, is that we know exactly what some of the things that can be done that have shown to be effective in preventing suicide. And it starts with just being aware, having every adult, having every child, everyone in our communities just know what to look out for. And the beautiful thing about that is that we already instinctually know what to look for when someone is struggling. The hard part is, for example, I didn't talk too much about this in the beginning, but one of the most important reasons why I do this work is that when I was 14 years old, I lost one of my best friends to suicide. Now, there's no way to know whether or not, if I had been more educated, been more aware, that anything would have changed. But at least it was worth a shot. At least it maybe would have had an impact. So being aware is where it starts. Number 2, and we're going to spend some time here today, is not being afraid to ask directly about suicide. The only way we can tell whether or not somebody's having thoughts of suicide is to ask them if they're having thoughts of suicide. So we're going to give you the skills around that. Once someone has been identified to be having thoughts of suicide, we need to make their environment safer. We need to get lethal means out of their home, or weapons and other things we'll talk about a little bit more in depth, and also create a safety plan. And a safety plan is a way for, it's a kind of a roadmap for someone to understand, what are my signs of distress, and what are some of the things that I can do to cope, and what are some of my distractions, and who are some of the people I can reach out to. And if all that fails, who are some of those crisis supports that I can lean on? And we also need to make sure that we're connecting individuals to mental health professionals that are trained in suicide prevention. Yes, mental health professionals do tremendous work, but when we're specifically looking for help with somebody who's having thoughts of suicide, there's a couple training, or what we call modalities of treatment, that have been shown to be effective with people who are thinking about suicide. And these are all therapy-based treatments, not necessarily medication-based treatments, which I think is important. But the same way that if you broke your foot, you would want to go to somebody who knows a lot about feet, you'd go to a podiatrist. You wouldn't go to an ear, nose, throat doctor. If you're having issues with suicide, or somebody in your family is, you want to make sure that you're finding out what type of training and what type of background does that mental health professional have. And perhaps the most important thing that we're starting to change in the system of how we support youth is trying to support them in the least restrictive settings. A lot of times when youth talk about suicide, they can put into a scenario that's actually more traumatizing for them. And we don't always need to press the red button. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. But again, just the premise here is that the good news is that we're starting in a good place by knowing some of the things that have been shown to be effective to prevent suicide. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Cheryl.
Okay, perfect. So thanks, Dan, for that segue. One of the big terms we've heard, particularly this year, is resilience. And I define resilience as not necessarily that you don't feel things that happen to you, you don't experience them, but that you can bounce back. So meaning that when things are hard, you still have the skills to keep going, to keep moving on, to keep, trying things in a different sort of way. And so for, in general, our goal is to raise resilient teens or children who can face the world, who don't need us always behind them. It'd be nice if, they always wanted us behind them, but that they can stand on their own and be independent as well. And so when we talk about resilience, we talk about it also as a buffer for mental health, as a protective factor is, whether or not you have concerns about your teens, you can, anyone in your life, it's important to build in some of these protective factors just for situations that, this whole year has been a situation that has come up and surprised us all. So there's certain things we can do to help our teens have the ability to cope. And that's the word we use a lot, coping skills. How do people cope when situations are hard? So there's a few things that we advise that you can do, and probably you're doing a lot of these already. So this is repetitive. I'm giving you props though for what you are doing. And one of those protective factors, ways of building resilience, is fostering positive connections. Teens who have at least one adult in their life that they feel they can connect to, who really listens to them, who cares about them, that they can go to, are shown to do so much better in life. So that could also be, hopefully it's you and you have that relationship with your child. Sometimes that's not always the reality, that it's the parent and child, but maybe there's a coach, there's a teacher, there's someone else in their life that can be that positive influence. And also just be important to connect, stay in touch with our friends, even if they're not in school, stay in touch with loved ones. I know at some point I wasn't limiting my son was allowed to be on the computer unlimited if he was FaceTiming like grandma or his aunt or something of that sort. So those are little ways we can build in keeping those connections, because what we've learned this year is connectedness is definitely really important for a buffer for everything. Healthy emotional skills, we talked about coping skills, and that's a great gift that we can give our children, is knowing how to cope when things don't go away. And so maybe they've already had that experience. They play sports and sometimes their team loses, or sometimes getting a bad grade on a test. So these are the things, how we teach them to move on during these situations. And a lot of it they learn from us. Our teens are watching, or even our children, our teens are watching even when we don't think they are. So showing how we deal with tough situations can be really powerful for showing them how to deal with them as well. And it's even simple as modeling. I had a really rough day today. I'm going to go, be by myself for 5 minutes. I just need some time to breathe and just reflect. Or, I'm really angry about this. I'm going to take a moment to cool down before I blow up. Our kids are watching during those moments, which means they're watching the moments we don't handle things in the best way as well. And I do believe redos are possible. So it can be, I had a really bad day. I yelled at you when I wasn't necessarily the best thing to do. I'm sorry for that. Let's kind of have a redo, and let's talk about how we can do better when, we're both in a stressed out mode. I also say exercise. I know for me, walks have been my savior this past year. So sometimes fresh air, if it's, it's realistic to walk where you live, or you have somewhere to be outside. If that's not the reality, so many different exercise classes and programs are offering free ways to, to move our bodies, because I think that's a lot of what we've been deprived this year, being at home. We don't move around as much. And research has shown pre-pandemic that physical exercise can definitely reduce stress and depression. So no means comprehensive, but 3 things you can do that probably most of you are doing already. So good props. Also talk about, as parents, if we want our teens to talk to us, we need to create a safe space where hopefully our home is that safe haven, that place where they just feel comfortable being where they are, letting it all hang out and knowing they're accepted and loved for who they are. And some of you may relate to this, where you get, you have a teen or child who might be a challenge at home, but at school you hear from their teachers, oh, they're so perfect, they're so well-mannered, they do this, they're such a friend, and you're thinking, is this the same child? I know I've had that experience. And that actually, as frustrating as that can be, means we're doing something right. Home is their safe place where they can let it all hang out, where they don't have to be, conforming to the day. They don't have to be holding it all together. So knowing that, in creating a safe space this year has really been about us not having the answers. And I think as parents, we really try to fix things. We really try to make it better for our children. And this year we really haven't been able to, because we haven't had the answers. There've been a lot of I don't know, and things have changed. And so being okay, being okay with that, and also creating space to listen, because that's really what our teams do need from us. Being able to listen and hear what they're going through is much more powerful than being able to fix it. So one thing we can do is sharing your emotions. I mean, not to the point where your teen becomes your friend and they're your therapist and they're helping you with everything that's going on, because we want to have that boundary between parent and child. But if you're having a hard day, if you're angry, if you're sad, letting them see that as well, because that role models that it's okay to express emotions. If you're stoic and not showing any of it all the time, it's role modeling. This isn't, let's hold the emotions in, which doesn't really go well. It comes out in other ways. I think Stan and I are going to also talk about knowing your resources. If you are struggling or your child's struggling or someone in your family, knowing where to reach out to, and we'll definitely talk about that. And knowing your support systems as well. And if you don't have them, this is a really good time to find some support systems, whether it's online, whether it's in real life, because if you're supporting people in your life who are struggling, that can definitely take a toll on you. So make sure that you have that support as well. And what I want to also acknowledge is that, like anything else, this takes time. If you have a teen that's struggling, if maybe you're here because your teen has, made some type of suicide attempt, or just struggling with mental health, this takes time to get through. This isn't like a quick and easy fix, like Stan used his analogy. If you break your leg, it's not like you're better the next day. I mean, you may have to have surgery, you may have to have a cast, there may be physical therapy. So this is a process. It does take time. And knowing that, just like with the broken leg, don't necessarily feel better the next day. So maybe changing around our expectations a little bit, which I think in general we've all learned about this year, but not necessarily expecting the same things that you might have had previously, and helping them to create a network of trusted friends and family who can be their support for you and for the family. Obviously deciding who you want to tell, because that's an important, I'm very against decreasing stigma, but I'm also very aware that there are people that may not be the best people to tell what's going on in your family. So figuring, or family or friends, figuring out who those people are, who can be the support, who aren't going to be judgmental, who are just going to be a support for you and your family is important to recognize. And now I think I'm turning it back to Stan. Or is this me too?
Yeah, I just want to jump in though. One thing I did want to say is simply that when it comes to the healing takes time, one of the things that I think we worry about is when a child has an issue of impacting their mental well-being, mental health at a younger age, we often worry that that is setting them up for a lifetime of struggle. And what I actually find is that the youth who deal with adverse experiences and get into therapeutic models, some supports, and find their own skills actually end up becoming more resilient adults once they've learned how to deal with some of these disappointments and pains and struggles that life throws at us. So, sweeping it under the rug is probably the most damaging. What we need to do is let them dive in, dig in, and jump in the mud with them. But yeah, Cheryl, it's actually still you, if you don't mind going.
You are, I am on. So what I usually, in real life, I do a presentation for parents called, how do I know if it's serious, when to worry? And we talk about typical teen behaviors and we talk about red flag behaviors. And I think this year things have changed a bit, that we're seeing, low level depression, for lack of a better word, in a lot of people, that a lot of people are struggling, maybe not at a clinical scale or at a point where they may need more additional support, but just some of the things that, typical has taken on a different meaning this year. And we're going to get through what specifically to look for. But I think one of the important things is to trust your gut, is your child best. So if you feel like something is off, that's the time to take it seriously, to either get them some outside support, to talk to them about what's going on, and keeping track of, what you're seeing. Because Stan, you can go to the next slide if you want, but I was gonna say, one of the things, usually to be diagnosed with depression, you have to meet certain criteria for a 2-week period of time. So it's not necessarily, your child had one day where they were just crying in their room all day. It's the pattern that wouldn't be, obviously that's something to talk to them, find out what's going on, but not necessarily as worrisome as a kid who's crying in their room every day for 2 weeks. So we want to kind of look at duration. We want to look at patterns. We want to, look at the baseline is a really important thing to think about. And if you want, this will be recorded, but if you want to screenshot this slide, it's some good questions to ask yourself of whether you should be concerned about your child. But what I'm going to say also is looking at the baseline. If you had a child who used to be really active, really engaged in a lot of activities, lots of friends, was, an outgoing child, really cared about school, and now none of that seems to be the case, that's more worrisome to me than a kid who never really cared that much about school, never was that active, and they're continuing to kind of be the same way in the pandemic. And I'm bringing up, a lot of their activities have been taken away from them. So it's not necessarily a fair example, but I'm talking more about things, maybe engaging with the family, coming out of the room, being willing to, go places, being willing to talk to other family members. So we're looking for changes like that. We're looking for things. Have you noticed them angry a lot, agitated, irritable? Again, we're all angry, agitated, irritable, but it's a pattern over time, how much we're seeing it, how much it's concerning us. We're also looking at risky behaviors, and this can be, it'd be as simple as like going out without a mask or going to a party nowadays, or it could be things like sexually promiscuous behavior or drugs or alcohol. Another thing we look for when we're talking about suicide is, have they given away belongings? Because teens don't necessarily make wills the way adults will, but they may start, if they're planning to take their life, or they, thinking they're not going to be here, they may want to get rid of their belongings. So, your teen comes home and says, blah, 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 just gave me their iPhone because they said they don't need it anymore. That's the time for you as a parent to kind of check in, is blah, blah, blah okay? Because that's not typical for a friend to give away the iPhone. Or if you find your kid giving away belongings, that's definitely a time to be concerned and to definitely intervene. And like I said, you can definitely screenshot, blow up these questions, because these are good things. The more that ring true, the more concerned you should be, or at the very least, which Stan and I will help you, having a conversation about what you've noticed with your teen as well, so you can provide support as to what changes you're seeing.
Yeah, and I'll also be dropping in a link here in just a few minutes where you can find this whole parent suicide prevention brochure online, so you can go through the full version. All right, so now that we've kind of set it up for, what is normal, what's abnormal, and, not that anything is normal right now, but focusing specifically on a few of the key warning signs that really show when that critical risk level is there, and you see them on the screen. So when a youth or anybody is talking about, talking or writing about death or not wanting to be alive, especially if that's suicide. Now, as we start to turn into teenagers, as we grow older, of course, every one of us has a right to explore philosophically life and death and what it means. But when it kind of becomes an obsession, when it moves beyond that, we want to be especially concerned, especially in the form of suicide. As Cheryl talked about, when someone begins to take steps, whether that's writing out a letter, seeking means, looking for ways to harm themselves, or make a suicide attempt online, we want to be especially concerned. And really, when it comes right down to it, it's about hopelessness. When I simplify suicide down to its two most basic factors in my mind, it's just about pain and hope. And suicide happens when that pain outweighs that hope. And so when someone begins to lose that hope, we want to be especially concerned, because we are, as humans, as individuals, we are remarkably strong to deal with whatever is thrown in front of us. But when we start to lose the hope that we can overcome is when we really want to be concerned. So those are three of the priority or critical warning signs. But I want to take a moment and share this with you. This is pulled from the Know the Signs campaign, suicideispreventable.org. Here you can see some of those other warning signs. Again, what we're looking for is any significant change in personality, in their behaviors. And really what we're looking for is, what is the why behind this behavior? Somebody who used to be really calm is now getting mad easy or getting sad easily. Someone who used to always take care of themselves is now starting to withdraw and isolate and stay away from other people. One of the warning signs I think we miss a lot, especially with young boys, although it can happen with all teenagers, is when we see anger or aggression, irritability, or reckless decisions, we assume that that person is, just acting badly, not that that person might be in emotional pain. But I know when I was growing up being taught as a young boy what emotions are okay and which ones are not, I was clearly told that it's not okay to be sad or to cry, but it is okay for boys to get angry. And so I think we're missing a lot of the emotional pain that our young boys are having out there. And again, I apologize for kind of being binary with that statement, but it is just something that I've seen and heard. But again, what we're looking for is any change. And as Cheryl said, trust your instincts. You are experts in your children. You're experts in people. And we're never going to know whether or not somebody is thinking about suicide unless we are willing to actually have a conversation with them. So if you sense something is wrong, the most important thing you can do is have a conversation about suicide. Don't delay in getting help. Now, also to acknowledge that the closer we are to somebody, the tougher it can be for us to ask that question. And it's perfectly okay if you're just not the person, if you just don't have it in you to have this conversation. Find somebody who can. You can contact your school. You can contact a community resource. You can contact a county behavioral health resource or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. But somebody has to ask the question. And we're going to walk you through it in a moment. Just noticing what you've seen. If I was approaching Cheryl and I said, hey, I know you've been going through some tough times, whether it's a relationship issue or I know you've been really stressed out, overwhelmed at school and feeling really alone. And I noticed that you've been withdrawing and you seem to get angry easily. And sometimes when people are going through what you're going through and acting the way that you're acting, they're thinking about suicide. And I just want to know, are you thinking about suicide? Well, one of the reasons why people say that they don't want to ask the question is they're worried about putting the idea in somebody's head. And what we know from a lot of research is that talking about suicide does not cause it to happen. These studies have been done also with youth. Talking about suicide does not cause it to happen. And honestly, in the tens of thousands of conversations I've had, I have rarely, if ever, had anyone get angry or upset with me for asking. And typically what I see is it's like a pressure valve got released and the person's shoulders relax. And now suicide is not just this monster in their head. It's something that we can have a conversation about. But the most important question is simply this. If you forget everything else we say today, if you can walk away with the strength and skill to ask this question, are you thinking about suicide? So with that, as I said, it does not increase the behavior. It's one of the only ways that we can do it. And I want you to think back to when you were in school. Was there ever a time in middle school or high school where the teacher explained something 3 or 4 times and you have absolutely no idea what they said, and yet you didn't raise your hand to ask for help? If it's that difficult for a child to ask for help on something like math and science, imagine how difficult it can be for them to ask for help on something like suicide or depression. So just creating the space to have that conversation and ask that question. And actually, just 1 second, I want to switch something really quick. All right, apologies. So just some tips as you're building up to having this conversation with your child. As Cheryl said, number 1, getting yourself into a good headspace, taking a couple breaths, just realizing how tough this can be for you. Creating a safe environment for both yourself and your child. One of the tips I hear from youth a lot is that they feel a lot more comfortable having a conversation with their parent when they're doing something, doing a task or going for a hike or working on a project together. When our hands are busy, it kind of lets our hearts and our minds open up a little bit. Another one is give yourself plenty of time. Same way that my mom used to tell me when she came home from work, let me get 2 feet in the door before you ask me any questions. She needed a moment to center and become, get her head back into this place. Be respectful of what's going on in your kid's life. The night before the big event or the big test may not be the most appropriate time. So being respectful of their time and also realizing that this, may not be a short conversation. You may really need to spend some time in this space. Again, having your resources ready, and we're going to share some of those resources with you. And a lot of times people will ask me, well, I'm so worried about saying the wrong thing. And what I have found is that it's very difficult if you're coming from a place of compassion and empathy to say the wrong thing. And most importantly, you actually really shouldn't be talking that much. There's an old saying that says we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. And so it's important for us in these moments to not try to solve the problem, to not try to fix anything, but just to hear what they're feeling. Instead of saying things like, I know exactly what you're going through, say, I can't imagine how tough this must be for you. Thanking your youth for being open. And then again, making sure you have your own internal supports to go back to. So I know we're not here in the same room together, but you're all muted and most of your cameras are off anyways. And I want you to actually do this. I just want you to take the opportunity right here and ask this question out loud. Are you thinking about suicide? There's only one way that we want you to avoid asking that question, which a lot of people kind of fall into, which is, are you thinking about hurting yourself? And the reason why we don't want to ask that question that way is because, one, we want to say the word suicide. We want to let them know we're willing to talk about it. But two, if we've introduced this idea that suicide is actually not about ending life, it's about ending what feels like insurmountable pain. If you ask someone if they're thinking about hurting themselves, if they're having thoughts of suicide, they might incorrectly believe that suicide is going to relieve their pain. So they may not hear the question that you think you're asking. So you want to ask directly, are you thinking about suicide? So if you please, sitting there at home, will just say this out loud to me. If you feel too awkward now and you want to do it in the mirror later, in the shower, driving in the car later, but I don't want the first time you ask this question to be when the stakes are real and you're talking to somebody in person. What I want to do now, though, is I'm going to turn it back over to Cheryl, and she's going to talk a little bit about what to do if your child says yes.
Yes. So obviously I love Stan telling people to practice that, because it is a really anxiety producing thing to say, to even be asking about it, or to be that concerned that you would ask a question is definitely terrifying. The other way you don't want to ask is the leading sort of way of, you're not thinking about suicide, are you? Because if you think about that, that's sending the message that they need to kind of they need to take care of you. They need to say, no, don't worry, I'm fine. It's not just sending that clear message. I want to hear your honest answer. I can be there in this darkness with you and handle whatever you have to say. So as a parent, probably the most terrifying thing you'll ever have to ask your child. And I hope that that's not the case for people, but I do think it's good to just know what to do. Maybe it's not your child, but it's your best friend's child or someone in your community, and having these tools are so important to do. So if you do ask the question and someone says yes, again, internally, you're completely freaked out, scared, terrified, awful thing to, awful thing. But I think we need to take it seriously. If someone says yes, it's not, oh, you never do it, or, oh, you're just kidding, or, oh, you're just being dramatic. It's really taking it seriously. It's also remaining as calm as possible. Again, terrifying thing to hear from your child. So very, very hard to remain calm, but as calm as we can be. As a matter of fact, again, I know I'm asking for the impossible, to be as better we can. Thank them for letting you know. I'm really appreciative that you told me this. I'm so glad. Now we're going to work through this. I'm here for you. I want to help you. What's been going on that you feel this way? Really listen to them. Open up to their pain. Some of it may be a surprise to you. Some of it you may know already, but the depths of the pain, listen to them for there. And then someone's asking the question, yes, we do want to contact someone. We want to figure out, and I think that's probably our next slide, we want to listen to them. We want to hear what's going on, but we want to, before that very second they say yes, and then we rush them off to a mental health professional, we lost the opportunity to have a connection with them, to start that conversation, to let us know that we're there, to let them know that we also can be a safe place. Maybe we're not a trained mental health professional and they need more that we can offer, but we're at least there with them in the journey. So we don't want to pass them off quite yet. We want to listen and really hear what's going on.
Yeah, and Cheryl, if I can, I would just add to that. One of the questions that I encourage people to ask is, think about it this way. Let's say that your child came to you and they said to you, I have a stomach ache. What types of questions would you ask your child about the pain in their stomach? You would ask them probably, well, how long have you been experiencing this pain? What do you think is causing the pain? What makes it worse? What makes it better? Scale of 1 to 10, how bad does it hurt right now? So let's say that Cheryl comes to me and says, and we're talking, I ask her if she's having thoughts of suicide. Once I determined that she's having thoughts of suicide, instead of focusing all my questions on suicide, because that's not really her problem, right? Her problem is the pain that is driving those thoughts of suicide. I can instead ask questions about the pain to understand. Oh, Cheryl, I had no idea you were in this much pain. How long have you been feeling this? Okay, you've been feeling this way for a couple months. Okay, well, when's the pain the worst? When you look at social media, when you think about your ex, when you do this, what makes it better? Where's the pain right now? Scale of 1 to 10, it's at a 7. Okay, has it ever been at a 10? Okay, it was at 10 a couple of days ago. Well, what happened a couple of days ago to make that pain so intense? And what happened between a couple of days ago and today to bring that pain down a little bit? And so now we're starting to also build some hope into this conversation that this pain is not completely out of their control. But I find that especially for parents, that might be a good way for you to lead into some of those next questions. Another thing to remember too is that time is on your side. What we know is that most cases where if someone is actually capable of making a suicide attempt are fairly short, about 30 to 90 minutes. They may debate or wonder about suicide for months or even years, but the number of times where they actually are capable of suicide are usually pretty short. So one of the best things we can do is just keep them in a safe environment, stay with them, keep them safe until we can connect them to the appropriate services. But Cheryl, I'll turn it back over to you for this one to go back to the question of the next steps.
And I think we skipped what did they say no? So let's go back to that at some point because you may have the scenario. Stay where you are, but then that's not in there for some reason. Okay, or maybe it's next. Okay, so we'll do it. To the question, any teen, I'm going to agree, if they're thinking about suicide, particularly if they have a plan, and why they say, to Stan's point, there's a lot of people, even amongst us, who think a lot about, what it would be like if I wasn't here, what if I were out of the pain, what if I didn't have to deal with this, but we wouldn't necessarily act on it. Acuity is more concerned when someone has a specific plan, when they have a way of doing it. And so that's one of the things we want to find out as well, along with Stan with the stomachache questions, which I love that analogy as well. Have you thought about how you might do it? And I think the more realistic, the more realistic the plan, the more seriously we do have to take it, obviously. But any teen who's struggling needs some kind of help. They need support because obviously their pain has reached a tough point. And I know there's definitely a myth that people who talk about suicide or think about suicide are attention seeking. And I want to call that out and say, this may be the only way that they know how to express what they're going through. So yes, they may be looking for attention, but not in the way you're looking for it, just the way this is the only way to communicate how intense the feelings are. We want to take it seriously. We want to know that we hear them, but we want to be assessed to see what the next steps are. Is this a teen that needs to be hospitalized? Is this a teen that's safe to be at home? What can you do as their parent? So we put next steps. We're going to talk a little bit about Teen Line. National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 24/7. They have counselors on staff that this is what they do. They're trained to help you. They're trained to de-escalate the situation. They're trained to connect you to outside support. If you have a mental health professional already in your life, that's great. Pediatricians, schools are also really good, whether they're remote or in person, really good source of support for your student. And generally, mental health records are kept separate from academic records, so you don't need to worry that it's going to go on your child's transcript, that they talk to the school counselor or things like that. If it's a real immediate threat, I mean, your teen is standing in front of you and just not safe or with a weapon, things of that sort, definitely is calling 911, or if you feel you can't keep them safe, taking them to the hospital that evening. And we do want to, Stan has a great app in here as well. But if you do have a child that's thinking about suicide, we want to make safety a priority. This isn't a political statement by any means, but guns are a lethal means of dying by suicide. So if you have guns in the home or other weapons, if we can remove them from the home, take them to a safe place, medicines, other things out of the reach of children. Teens are sneaky. They get into things that we think they have no access to. So making our home as safe as possible. And then we talk about something called a safety plan. Ideally, they're doing a safety plan with a mental health professional or even with the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, if that's who you call, creating a safety plan of steps that they will take. A lot of us know the warning signs of when I'm really struggling, things that I can do, how I can cope, who I can reach out to, so that there's a real plan in place when they're feeling overwhelmed. Because as Stan pointed out, usually the acute part of the suicide is when we want to intervene, when they're getting to that acute place, what can they do instead?
And so just to clarify, you can go to my3app.org. That's the website that explains the app. You can go there on your phone and there'll be a button that says download on iPhone or Android. Or you can just go into the Google Play Store or the App Store and just Google My3 or search My3. And it's free to download. And again, your child can complete the safety plan. They can email a copy to you, email a copy to their therapist. But if you connect your child to a mental health professional, this should absolutely be one of the things that mental health professional does. Or again, you can do it with your child and it can be updated. But again, just to reiterate and just emphasize, when you're having that conversation, we can't push this enough that the Suicide Prevention Lifeline is not just for people in crisis. If you're preparing to have a conversation with your child and you need a little coaching up before that happens, you can contact them. If you just talk to your child and they told you that, yes, they are thinking about suicide, you can call them and they can help guide you through what are the appropriate next steps right now. Do we keep your child safe till we can contact the school or mental health care in the morning? Is the hospital the appropriate place, or what other steps are available to you? Or you get done talking to your child, then you're overcome with emotion and you just need to debrief with somebody or find some resources. You can call them. So anytime, day or night, and really emphasizing this to the youth as well, that they don't have to wait till they're having thoughts of suicide to reach out. And we're going to share some other resources here with you. So this would be the chance, if you could, please pull out your phone and take a picture. One step further would actually be to create a new contact in your phone. One is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Calls in San Bernardino County are routed to the D.D. Hirsch Suicide Prevention Center over in Los Angeles. The number there is 1-800-273-8255. You see it there. They also have an online chat feature, so you can go onto their website and be connected to a crisis counselor via a chat over a computer. Separate organization, but a similar service they provide is the crisis text line. This is obviously a little bit more attractive to many youth who might be more comfortable texting rather than talking. So you can text hello to 741-741. Both of these phone numbers should also be on the back of your student ID, of your child's student ID cards, so that they always have it with them. But again, emphasizing this is not just for if you're thinking about suicide. If you have a bad day, you need to talk to somebody. This is a phenomenal resource that is available 24/7 to you. Now, Cheryl and her organization, Teen Line, is one of the best kept secrets as far as youth supports. And I wanted her to speak to what type of support your child can expect by contacting Teen Line. So Cheryl, if you don't mind talking for a few minutes about that.
No, not at all. And this actually, I'll update it in, oh, there, perfect. Okay, that's what I was going to say. So Teen Line is what we sound. We are a teen-to-teen hotline. We've been around for about 40 years, created on the premise that when teens are struggling, they're much more likely to go to their peers than they are to the adults in their lives. So towards that end, we train about 60 to 80 teens throughout the Los Angeles area every year to what we call listeners. And as listeners, we do calls, texts, emails as well from teens, honestly, all over, mostly country, but all over the world as well, about whatever they're going through. So it can be, we say nothing's too big or too small. So a teen who's struggling with a relationship issue to sexual assault, LGBTQ, to suicide. So it's a great resource for your teens to know about. We're open 6 to 10 Pacific Standard Time because we are staffed by teens. We can't be 24/7. But we partner with D.D. Hirsch Suicide Prevention Line to take our calls after hours. So 24/7, if your teen were to call, they would get someone. It would only be during our specific hours that they would get a teen. If you go back a slide, we also have a message board as well, which is a great resource for teens who are just looking to find more support in this community. We have a Youth Yellow Pages, which is a lot of resources that you can find for additional help and support. And you can see our hours here. We're also on all the different social media, so follow us. We post some good stuff as well.
And another great resource out there, in case you're not aware, is the Trevor Project is a suicide prevention entity that focuses on LGBTQ youth and young adults. So they have a separate hotline that is trained by culturally competent staff. Familiar, many of them identify as LGBTQ. So this is another phenomenal resource for, again, youth and young adults who identify as LGBTQ. They have a crisis line as well as the text chat line. And so that's kind of the crisis resources. So we've talked about what to look for, how to get a baseline. We've talked about when to be especially concerned and what might drive you to have thoughts about, to ask a question or have a conversation about suicide. Some of the responses you can do: contacting a crisis resource, approaching your school, making sure that they're getting to a mental health professional who's been trained properly. But one of the ways that you can start conversations with your youth is based on that film I shared earlier, or many of the other youth created films from the Directing Change program. So Directing Change is a youth mental health suicide prevention program where instead of going into a classroom and talking at youth, we invite youth to create films on the topics. We have a library with literally thousands of films that you might want to use to set up the stage to have that conversation. We do a number of trainings such as this. We also have a number of educational resources on our website. And one of the things I would encourage you to do after we're done here today is, whether you're at a middle school, high school, or elementary, all schools that serve pupils in grades pre-K through 12 now are required to implement suicide prevention policies and procedures. So I would encourage you to ask your school what they've done to address suicide and suicide prevention, how they've trained their staff, what are they doing to educate youth. And if they're not already doing Directing Change, of course, selfishly, I would encourage you to participate. So you can go to directingchange.ca.org for more information. I also wanted to revisit those websites again for more information about warning signs, risk factors, how to have a conversation. You can go to suicideispreventable.org, or the Spanish language, el suicidio es prevenible.org, for more information. And again, all these resources are available at Directing Change. So with that, here's our contact information. I'm going to go ahead and put these websites in the chat. But Marissa, we're getting to the point, we're about an hour in. So what we really wanted to do now is shut down the presentation part and really open it up to any conversation, any questions you have. The one thing that I will say is that if you have a very kind of detailed, focused question, we may not be able to resolve that, and it might be better for you to contact one of the crisis, but if you crisis support resources. But if you have a more general question about what we've covered today, we're going to open it up for questions now. So with that, you can type it in the chat. You can unmute yourself. You can raise your hand, whatever questions you might have.
And Stan, I see a question already typed. If the child says yes, should the mental health be contacted immediately? So we can probably get started with that question.
Yeah, and Cheryl began to cover this one earlier, but yeah, if your child says yes, that they are having thoughts of suicide, you absolutely want to get them connected to a mental health professional. That now, again, maybe going to the crisis resource, calling the National Lifeline first, how to keep your child safe in the moment. Maybe they can make a referral for you, or contacting your school. But you want to make sure that your child is evaluated by a mental health professional, ideally a mental health professional with significant training around suicide and suicide risk. Unfortunately, though, they can be hard to find, and that's why it can be good to contact the crisis resource such as the National Lifeline to help identify somebody that would be the appropriate person to speak to. But absolutely, if your child says yes, they are having thoughts of suicide, you want to make sure they're being assessed and screened by a mental health professional. Another question came in, or a few people were asking about PDFs of the presentation. Yes, we're absolutely happy to share a PDF. If this is something you want to review, go over with some of your friends. We will do that. We're also going to be doing this same content on Thursday afternoon, same time, 5 to 7 in Spanish. So if you are interested in that, please encourage or share the flyer with anybody that you know. All right, and this is your opportunity to ask whatever you might need. Again, you can message me or Cheryl directly, or Marissa, if you don't want to identify or see everybody chatting in the question.
Yeah. Someone asked me a question if law enforcement should be contacted after mental health, and I would say it probably really depends on the situation. If someone's unsafe or you feel like you need help escorting them somewhere, then law enforcement would be appropriate. But I think in most scenarios, contacting a crisis line or a mental health professional should be sufficient. I don't know if you'd answer that differently, Stan.
No, I agree. And if I didn't mention this, I come from a family of law enforcement, and they will tell you that they don't want to be the ones to respond unless absolutely necessary. There's a lot of other steps that we can take to keep a child safe without inflicting that level of trauma of being in the back of a police car and transported to a hospital. And a lot of the times, again, one of the most important questions we can ask our children is, what do you think you need? What will help keep you safe? And working up from there instead of starting at the most aggressive and working our way back. We really want to be respectful of our youth in those situations. So Sonia Rubio with County Behavioral Health is typing in some county resources. Marissa also put in the survey, if you could take a few minutes just to type that in. So Sonia, not to put you on the spot, but also want to mention that she's here. So if you have any questions specific about county behavioral health and resources, she can also speak to those as well. Of course, we have the superintendent of schools here, so, so we can try to answer as best we can whatever questions you have.
I had a question.
Yeah, Chris, go ahead.
Thank you. I remember in high school, we had, and this person, they were very quiet. They kept to themselves, and I was in the same grade with his brother, but he took his life on campus, and I just remember it being a very, very big shock. So that's the one thing that sticks in my mind about the discussions and getting the material. But my question is, are there always signs of people thinking about suicide, or for the most part, or not?
I wish there was an easy answer to that. And to be honest with you, after Jesse died, I thought this was out of the blue. That was my friend who I lost in high school. I didn't see this coming. Where did this come from? And it took, me getting educated. But to be honest with you, it's quite possible that you could have given me a list of warning signs and put Jesse right there in front of me. And I could have gone down that list of warning signs and said, yes, 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 yep, did that one too. And my brain still would have fought me from connecting the dots, from my friend being able to consider suicide. And I can't imagine how much more difficult that would be for a parent to associate a behavior with thoughts of suicide, because we don't want to believe that anybody we care about could be having thoughts of suicide. So sometimes it's just our own bodies and brains fight us on recognizing those signs. But absolutely, sometimes people can be very stoic and hide their warning signs. They're so worried about. That's why we, especially with youth, we often hear stories of the child. I remember a few years ago, there was a middle school age child who had died by suicide, and the detectives who were investigating it, they contacted me and they said, we don't understand this. This young girl, 13 years old, she was ASB president, she was first chair in the orchestra, she was everything to everybody. Why would this young girl who had it all going, why would she end her life? And I said, detective, you just answered your own question. A 12-year-old girl shouldn't feel the pressure to be everything to everyone. So oftentimes the youth who are achieving well may hide it even better. So that's why it's, we have this idea of suicide prevention, kind of like this lifeguard mentality, right? When we're at the beach, we want to always have the lifeguard to watch out for us. And that's what we do a lot of our training on. But what we try to do a lot more with the schools and the superintendent of schools, county behavioral health, are trying to do programs around social emotional learning. And so what we're trying to do is get people to understand better when they are in danger, when they might need more help, and what some of their own coping skills are. So that was a very long answer to your question. I guess the short answer is no, we are not always aware. And even when we are aware, that doesn't mean that we're always going to be able to save everybody. What we can simply do is be as knowledgeable, be as in tune as we can, and try every effort. And that doesn't mean it's always going to work. And unfortunately, I've had to accept that there are going to be other people likely that I lose in my life to suicide. But I want to hopefully be able to look back and say that I didn't miss it, and that I did everything in every possible chance. So I'm really sorry for the experience you had in high school. Again, I know we're not the only loss survivors here today. It's just about doing the best we have with what we have.
Thank you.
And I think, Chris, you bring up a good point also of just, remembering. We remember the times our lives have been touched by suicide, whether it's a really close, intimate person or someone more in our peripheral sphere, which is important to remember. And there is a sense of, as Dan acknowledged, survivor guilt or some ways, or what could we have known? What could we have done differently? And sometimes, even with the best tools, as Stan's saying, we did our best, but hopefully today coming away, it's at least starting the conversation. One of the goals, if you haven't talked to your kid about mental health or suicide or teens, now's the time to do so, because I think that's one of the biggest ways to build resilience or to buffer your kid to have these conversations in your home. And I think a simple way to do it is even just, talking about what a webinar you went to. And it may be, too close and intimate to say, have you ever felt that way? But, is this something that happens in your friend group? What do you know about this? Your children may amaze you, or teens, how much they do know, how much they've experienced. Even if they're not willing to talk about their friends and themselves, at least starting, I want you to know if you're struggling, I am a resource for you. I am here. Or if you don't feel like you can talk to me, there's other people in your life you can talk to. So that's another takeaway homework. Start having this conversation if you haven't already. And we get asked how young it is. They're saying, people say as young as 8. People know the concept of suicide. It's tricky, like 8 to 10-ish. They don't necessarily understand that death is permanent. So it's a tricky concept, but particularly the media savvy world our teens or young people are growing up in, I keep mixing terms, sorry. Young people are growing up and they know about these things earlier than we do. So saying, oh, they're 10, they don't need to know about that. They do. And it can be an age appropriate language. If you ever felt so sad, if you ever felt so sad, you didn't know what to do, or you just, felt like so angry or just overwhelmed, naming feelings is a really important tool we can give our kids. So that was just something that struck with me. I also love someone said I always go and check on students who look like they're loners. Really important. Kids who are isolated are definitely struggling, or not definitely. Kids who are isolated, yes, let's keep an eye on. Let's help them be less isolated. But to Stan's point, we also can't dismiss the high school captain of the football team, or this person or this person. Perfectionism, as Stan was talking about, is also a risk factor for suicide as well. So sometimes those teams who seem like they have it all together are really struggling on the inside. And it's even harder for them to admit, because on paper, everything looks perfect. Like, who's going to believe the captain of the football team is suicidal because he has everything going for him? It's almost easier for the loner in some ways to, see it, if that makes sense.
Well, I think that's an important part of the conversations we have with our youth about what is mental health, that things don't have to be going wrong for you to not be okay. And that's a struggle that a lot of youth that I speak to, they have, parents that are supportive, or, adults in their life who are supportive. They don't necessarily have anything going bad in their lives, and yet they still feel this way, and letting them understand that our brains are an organ, and sometimes they're not going to work as well as we want them to, especially when we're under a tremendous amount of stress. One question I wanted to pass over to you, Sonia, was somebody had asked about does the county still have a crisis response team? Can you speak to that and what people can expect or how they can access it?
Hi, thank you. Yes, Dan, we absolutely in San Bernardino County have a crisis response team, CCRT, Community Crisis Response Team. And there is a number to call, and I can put that in the chat so that you have that available to you. But they come out to any of the community crisis of any age. So, we get a lot of calls for young folks, and we also get a lot of calls for adults. So I can put that in the chat.
Great, thank you. And again, it's just more levels of support that you have, between just calling law enforcement. And again, we're not saying don't call law enforcement if that's what the situation demands. We're just saying that there's a lot of other responses that can work prior to that true, crisis. And CRT is one. Contacting the crisis line is another. What other questions do you folks have? I know we've been talking about suicide and suicide prevention for a little bit now, so hopefully it's starting to sink in. But any other questions that you might have for myself, for Cheryl? Any of your local representation? Again, you can chat it in, you can raise your hand. All right, I'm not seeing any chat come in. So while we're waiting for any other questions, again, so a few to-dos for you from leaving here today. Number one is just being, make sure you have those crisis supports locked into your phones, that you can access them, sharing those with your child. Just figuring out a time sometime this week to have a conversation with them. Maybe share them a Directing Change film, visit the Teen Line website, bring up this webinar that we've been doing tonight. Hey, I went to this thing the other day. And just start to drop some, some breadcrumbs for them around conversations about mental health. Another step would be to contact your school and say, what have you done to train your staff? What are you doing to engage our youth? Have they had any training around mental health, around suicide prevention? But most importantly, I think is just really embracing the role that you can have in this and creating that space. We're also getting some more resources dropped in the chat. Thank you, Beatrice, for putting a lot more of those in there. Some more resources in the chat as well as links. Any other questions though? Comments, feedback? Again, what we were hoping to do today, what we set out to do was, increase your knowledge about this, but most importantly, really make you more comfortable with this topic, that you're more qualified for this than you think you are. And just to reiterate how vital of a part you play in your family's lives.
What I was going to add in here, because our slide somehow went missing, of what if your child says no? So what if you ask someone if they're suicidal and they say no to you? We did do the scenario of what if they say yes? What if they say no? I think it's still important to, I think it's important to convey the reasons why you ask them. You don't just ask them out of the blue. There's enough going on that, this is what I've noticed. This is what made concern for you. Oh, here, you found it. Yes. Okay. Thank you. So we can put it back up. So what if they say no? I don't think it's necessarily a one-time conversation. It's not, okay, we've talked about mental health. We've talked about suicide. Okay, my role here is done. It's continuing to be vigilant about the behaviors you're noticing, continuing to check in, continuing to talk to them about mental health, helping them build coping skills and resiliency. Again, like we talked about already, just reminding them that you're there for them. I'm here for you. I want to be a resource. I kind of jokingly say, I don't think we always have to like our children in the very moment or the behaviors they do, but I do think we need to love them unconditionally. And so letting them know that there is a distinction. I am here for you. I am here to support you. I think a lot of the times our teens don't come to us, or children, because they think we're going to lecture or we're going to pass judgment on them. So being careful not to do those things as well. But again, if you continue to see things continue, this is an open dialogue in your home. Even if they say no, it may be appropriate to set them up with some mental health support. Because if you're seeing signs enough to ask, it may mean stuff's going on. And again, they can benefit from just some outside support. Like Stan said, it doesn't mean you're condemning a life of struggle per se. Maybe they go for a couple of meetings and get some tools that really help them throughout their life, and they become more resilient for that.
Yeah, and I always say that it's easier to go back to therapy than to start therapy, but I'm a believer that all of us should have some sort of therapeutic relationship, even if we're doing good, so that people know the baseline. One of the other struggles we hear with youth is they're trying to find a therapist, is trying to find that right fit. So spending some time with them, just even if you're saying, hey, I just want you to find somebody so that you have another source beyond me to check in with. I'm not going to make you go every month or whatever, but I just want you to go out and help, try to find the right person for you. So you have an idea of what you're looking for and what the qualities that you would want in that therapeutic relationship can be really effective. So yeah, great points all there, Cheryl. Thanks so much. All right, any other questions coming in? Sonia, Beatrice, are we missing anything? They're chatting that survey. If you could please take a moment to fill out the survey. It's got some general demographic stuff, a few questions about knowledge that we're hoping you're walking away with tonight. Other than that, I'm not seeing any questions. So